Okay, great. Thank you all again for joining us. We are thrilled for today's event. This is a panel discussion on the cost of living crisis and what it means for technology. And if this is your first thoughtbot event, welcome. We are so excited to have you. So thoughtbot is a design, development, and product management agency. We work to build great web and mobile applications for our clients and also help them build great product teams. And a big part of who we are is keeping a pulse on industry trends and the things that are impacting our clients' ability to be successful. So the goal of this panel today, this event today, is to bring together a group of experts to share what they're seeing and their tips, strategies, insights, so we can help others navigate the current landscape. So I'm excited to introduce our panelists today. We are thrilled that they could join us. First up is Kevin Withane. He is the founder of Diversity X. Diversity X is launching a pre-seed to seed stage venture fund to support underestimated founders of purpose-led startups seeking to make the world a better place and tech startups seeking to address issues that hinder diversity, equity, and inclusion. James Bryce Lynn is the head of strategic development at Mina Technologies. Mina Technologies is a tech company on a mission to help retail banks and subscription businesses deliver powerful digital experiences within subscription management. And Chris Edson, the CEO of Second Nature. Second Nature has helped thousands of people build better habits and is one of the UK's fastest growing digital companies, recently featured in Wired, TechCrunch, and The Times. So we are thrilled to have you and excited for the discussion today. So to set the stage, what we'll be talking about, the cost of living crisis refers to the fall in real disposable income since late 2021. It is being caused predominantly by high inflation, outstripping wage and benefit increases, and has been further heightened by recent tax increases. So today is all about talking about how are companies navigating this crisis, and is there anything we can do to aid those in doing so successfully? So that leads me to our first question for our panelists. What changes have you seen in regards to your industry, business, and/or target audience? And if you don't mind being put on the spot, Kevin, I would love if you could kick us off.
Sure, thanks. From the sort of fundraising, so I work with a lot of startups, but also building a VC firm is like looking at deploying, well, getting ourselves invested in, but also deploying capital into startups. And I'd say there's capital around, but it's not being deployed as quickly, I think, because the established investors are looking at their portfolio and seeing, do we need to help support and prop up part of that portfolio because of this, which means that they even if they're in investing mode, they're a little bit slower, they're a little bit more taking a more considered approach. Some would argue it's probably the approach that should have been taken in the first place anyway, like doing proper due diligence. From the founder side, I think it's a real problem. I think some are having to look at their own business models, particularly the B2C, who and direct customer, and looking at, is our proposition viable in this market, particularly like the sort of founders that I'm coming up are pre-seed and seed, so really early, still quite early in the game. And they're having to ask themselves questions of, are our target audience, are our customers going to buy this? Like when they've got to put more money towards heating their house or something else. So I think there definitely is an effect in the sort of people, both on the founder side and the investor side.
I think you're muted, Kelly.
Oh, sorry. I was asking what you thought. What would you share about your own experience?
For me?
Yes, please.
I can share. So yeah, obviously I run a venture-backed business. So we've raised 4 venture capital rounds over like a number of years, and the past 6 months, the biggest change that we've seen from a funding perspective, and every founder is talking about this, money is just dried up pretty much across the stages. Maybe less so in the early stage. I mean, Kevin, I don't know what your experience would be of this, but for later stage funding is becoming trickier. The VCs are looking far more at profitability rather than top line growth. Again, probably all in all a good thing. Um, and then like how that translates down to us is we're really changing things to be far more focused on our profitability. So we're not going for growth at all costs. Like last year we were kind of playing the VC game of spending lots and lots of money on marketing, trying to grow as quickly as possible, and we basically had to completely change tact this year. And then with regards to kind of our target audience, so most of our customers are looking to make some kind of healthy lifestyle change, or they're living with a disease like type 2 diabetes. It's really difficult to work out how kind of people's wallets are changing and their willingness to pay. It's like impossible to, if we have like a bad week, it's like, it's okay, is that because the electricity price cap has increased, or is that just because we ran a bad growth test? It's like
Right.
very difficult to like disentangle those things. So I'm not too sure yet. And our investors are warning us. They're like, hey, people are going to stop paying for things. We haven't seen it yet, but that's not to say that it's not happening on some level. It's just there are some trends that are almost, it's like in COVID, right? You had all these like competing trends. So with us, we help people lose weight. You had like a positive trend that people were at home more, so they spent more time on apps. And then you have this other trend where people were putting on weight because they were in lockdown. And all these trends kind of compete with one another, and they can be difficult to pull out to come to a meaningful conclusion.
Right. Very interesting. James, what
And
would you say?
yeah, I guess I'm coming at this from a different angle a little bit. Mina Technologies, we're selling into banks, and our end customer is ultimately the consumers. What we're trying to do is help them manage their expenses better by directly managing their subscriptions from the banking app. And so when you're looking at really the consumer and the pressures that they're feeling in this current environment, I think you've seen a number of responses from the top down. You're looking at regulators like the FCA coming in and the increased rhetoric around consumer duty. So you can see, that ongoing response to what we're facing as a consumer population. So that's trickling down to the rhetoric we're hearing from our target customers, which are the banks and the fintechs of the world, who are now looking at this rising cost of living and how they can demonstrate relevant value to their consumer populations as well. And we find ourselves in a great position to be able to meet that need, directly helping consumers to manage their expenses. And, as a headline level, one of our core customers, Lloyd's Banking Group, as an example, is looking to be increasingly active around the PR angle that they're getting through the savings that we're helping with our consumers. To pull a figure out of the air, and I wouldn't say that out of the air, it's a pre-prepared figure, but we've helped our 20 million retail banking customers that we reach save over $300 million to date as a company. And so I think that's from an industry perspective and how we're helping our target audience respond to the current environment.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. That actually is a great segue to my next question, especially both Chris and James, what you highlighted, the importance of, as these things are changing, as the world is changing, how can we best keep a pulse on our audience and then respond to what we're seeing? So curious, what's working for your teams right now?
The most helpful thing for us has been so our investors have been really good at running kind of various sessions, keeping a finger on the pulse of what inflation is and what consumer patterns are looking like. That's where I find I get most of my information is actually our investors presenting to us, which is helpful because we don't really have the resources internally to pull that stuff together.
Yeah, and I guess from our perspective, it's as a company being as active as we can in consultations around consumer duty, while also learning from our banking customers as well as prospective customers, and of course the consumers. You're responding to their exact needs. You know, a specific example of how we're developing our product in line with the needs of consumers is, in some circumstances, you know, a consumer might not want to just cancel a subscription. They may want to pause it or downgrade a plan or receive a retention offer as a means of still retaining that service, but not completely severing the tie. And that's where we're, with the introduction of new features like that, helping the two-sided marketplace that is MENA, which is, you know, helping serve a purpose for consumers through the banking apps, as well as building a critical and brand new category in a bridge between the merchants and the banks and the consumers. The flywheel, as I'm sure we're all very familiar with.
That's great. And I understand, you know, just that option, just that flexibility probably puts people at ease, just knowing they have some control there.
Yeah, exactly. I think statistically, around 15% of consumers would opt into pausing a subscription rather than cancelling it. Use a service like Hey You as an example, with this phenomenon we like to call internally subscription snacking, where you might sign up to Hey You, watch a series of the Kardashians or Selling Sunset, and then put it on pause, waiting for the next series of interest to come up.
Very cool.
I think with that as well, going on that pausing, given where we are in the cycle, like we're still coming out, certainly in the Northern Hemisphere, like we're still in the summer. So those energy prices, which I think is the big fear factor, like that's all we're hearing about. We're hearing about it in the UK, at least, it's the energy price cap. You know, I look at just in my own life, like the food bills have gone up. The petrol's gone up. Actually, I think it's come slightly down over the last, or it feels like it's come down. It cost me maybe £10 less to fill up the car, but double what it would cost me when I first bought the car in 2013. 2020. But the energy prices, I have not felt, like I've seen it go up, but I haven't felt the hit that's been talked about, because everybody's talking about it's going to come this winter. And so I guess the true cost of living crisis has maybe not hit everybody yet.
Yeah.
And I think it's seeing how people are reacting as they start preparing for that, like, because all we hear is there is only negative. There is no positive, you know. And when people say, well, you can, like Boris comes out with some stupid thing about how you can maybe save £20 in a year, and that's not material to anybody when you're talking about thousands of pounds in difference in cost. It doesn't make sense. So I think there is still a lot of watching to be done right now. We're still in that watching phase, really.
That's a great point. And having, you know, the understanding that things may continue to change, may continue to get harder, ensuring we have the right ability to connect and kind of track our audience's motivations or concerns is good to prepare ahead of time. Well, I'll take us to our next question. Anything to add here? In your own companies, with your own teams, what precautions have you taken to help navigate these changes, or even just the unknowns of what's to come?
So for us, we reduced a lot of marketing spend, you know, hiring freeze. We're generally reducing costs across the board. With we have like an internal mission, which is like, get to 2024. It's a thing that I say in every company all hands, which is like, the mission is get to 2024. So for us right now, that this is like a game of survival, and we will, but in order to do that, we have to make some difficult decisions around cost. Yeah. The world doesn't care about top line growth anymore. It's just survival. So with us, it's managing costs. It's like, what are the things in your control that you can, what are the things in your power to control, well, most of it is your cost base.
Sure.
I think from our perspective, it's everything that you said, but on top of that, it's narrowing the focus. Not going after 5 markets at once and focusing on a specific 2, prioritizing opportunities that are going to close sooner rather than the longer burns. So making sure that you're getting the most efficient use out of the resource, the human capital that you have. The hiring freeze, everyone's doing it. I mean, the news about Revolut today dropping all of their graduate scheme as an example. There's no shying away that everyone is reducing headcount similar to what we saw at the beginning of COVID. It's crazy to think this is the second round of this we've had in a few years, but these are generally the things that happen at the end of a long-term debt cycle. It's a bit of a confluence of awful events. But the main thing is that we are taking steps, and I'm sure you're seeing it at Diversity X with the new founders coming up, a lot more frugal spending as an example. But ultimately action has been taken, and now it's seeing that through, getting through this period.
Yeah, I agree. I think from the founder side, like they are much more cautious in spend. I still see decks though talking about, well, we need to hire here, but that's always bugged me, because the question is, you need to hire for the right roles, but you don't necessarily need to hire. You can use outside resources, freelancers, come in, drop in, do the role, leave. And some of them, like sometimes it's cheaper to do that. Like you get a more junior person, you put them in a role, then you bring in a mentor who's more senior, who comes in. So rather than spending big money on that named person, you get that named person just to do a very small amount to help build up the skill set of someone who's junior and who can grow into the role. But then it gives you that opportunity to develop someone within that ethos of the organization. But I also look at it as an opportunity to see how founders react, because Chris will know this, right? The market can change very quickly, and things come up unknown. Like this has been sort of talked about for a little while. Like, there's definitely, we're in a bubble anyway. But COVID wasn't. And the ability to change your business or to develop your business in these different cycles is a skill set. And so I look at it, and when I'm looking at founders, I'm looking like what sort of choices are you making and why are you making them? And for those that I mentor or advise, that's the sort of questions like, why are you going to make this decision? What's your thinking? Like, is it just reactionary, or can you see this turning into a plan? Like, and I'd like to see people being strategic in their thinking, not just go, well, we're going to do this. We're going to cut all of these jobs. So it's sometimes like, well, hold on, like Chris, you're talking about having to pivot from growth to survival, but survival means you still need, you're going to reduce that growth at all costs to building sales to get profitability. To do that, you need people still to do that. Who are the right people? So rather than market and spend is like, well, can we recycle those people? Ultimately, do they have the skills to do some of the other roles necessary that we need to do? Because firing people costs money. And so it's understanding how they balance those. I'm not saying like they shouldn't make those choices. It's just they have to not be reactive, but more strategic in their thinking, because with all down cycles, there's always an up cycle coming.
Great points. Thank you, Kevin. The next question, has the crisis shifted your goals for the future? I think we talked a little bit about some of the changes we've made, the groups have made tactically, but it sounds like, Chris, your goal is just to get to 2024. So the main goal has changed and your team is clear on that change. But for you, Kevin and James, has your goal for the next year, next 2 years changed because of the crisis?
From my side, the goal hasn't changed. I think it just makes it a little bit harder. Because I guess the runway for potential, like from us, once we launched the fund, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that. Once we've
Do you have an LP base, Kevin?
sorry.
Do you have an LP base?
Well, we're looking at. Can't really say anything yet.
That's right. I can jump in
Uh,
to give you a bit of time to reconsider. So, I mean, some of the things that we're doing here, the goal stays the same, but
Okay.
we're adjusting the way in which we work to achieve those. So, like I said before, leaner, tighter focus, it without expanding the team by the 10 or 20 heads that we wanted to bring in over the next 12 months. We're focusing in on restructuring the way that we work to get the most out of the resources that we have. Focusing on specific markets, focusing our even down to sales targets, looking at revenue-based targets because they're in line with our search for profitability and revenue rather than growth at any cost. So it's the little tweaks to the operating model that help you respond and ultimately optimize for the current environment.
Sure. So it's not so much a drastic change in the goal, but it's taking time to look at your path to get there and making sure it makes sense for what lies ahead.
Yeah, I think there's just more focus on how can we do this better? How can we achieve what we want with less resources or with the same resources rather than the expected growth that we were going to bring into the team?
Going back then, yes, I do. And they're not so affected, but they are slower to potentially support us.
Okay.
In the companies that we're looking at, we're also needing to reevaluate, not because we don't believe in the business or the thing. It's just that right now, the immediate market, is it going to affect our plans and our performance? And it might be one we'll just have to follow it and see how they do and come back to it a bit later. So there's, we're keeping people or companies in our radar, but we might, when we are in a position to deploy slightly differently than what we were currently envisaging.
Sure, that makes sense. Thank you. Has we actually kind of touched on this a little bit already. I'm not sure if anyone else has anything to add that we haven't talked about. It sounds like a lot of folks are maybe readjusting their plan to reach their goals, revisiting things like hiring goals or the focus of their team members' roles and responsibilities. Is there anything else that has changed how your company operates as a result of the crisis?
I think one interesting thing with us is there seemed to be a bit of a lag between our investors ringing the alarm bell and saying, guys, and this is like 5 months ago, they're like, things are about to get kind of bad. And then we, as founders, we would get that and say, all right, okay, things are about to get bad. And then bringing my team up to speed on that. I mean, this hasn't really changed how the company operates, but it came to mind. Especially with a younger team that maybe haven't seen a recession before, there's been a bit of a journey because they've gone through the last year that's being like, oh, like I can get amazing salaries and I can move from company to company and keep going up. And then we're saying, guys, we need to tighten the belts. And they're like, oh, but do we? Because I can job hop and get way more money. It's just been an interesting journey, I think, for the team.
That's an interesting point. That's yeah. If you haven't been through a recession before, this is going to be a real because this is different. Like, the 2008 one, there was a real, there was like you can almost say it was an epicenter for it in terms of as a point and what happened. But this is a number of different macroeconomic things all happening at once. Plus you've got the geopolitical issues happening as well. I think it's all just coming towards a perfect storm. And then you've got things like you've had the COVID for the UK having Brexit as well. We don't really a lot of things maybe got washed up with COVID and the effects. So people are now like, is this a Brexit thing or is this a post-COVID thing or is this a hangover from COVID? We don't quite know, but it's starting to shake itself out. and it's all creating this perfect storm. Whereas, the financial crisis and what it did, that was down to the financial industry itself, which ultimately created that whole issue, and had, a seismic effect. But this one is so many different forces. So, there are going to be people here still like, I can't see it happening. I don't see it. Okay, yeah, my bills are going up a bit, but my salaries aren't. I'm still earning pretty well, and I'm still the people saying like there's jobs out there, low in employment. So what's the big issue? And yet companies are like, we're tightening our belts. We're not going to hire. Like we might, and some companies still do that old trick of putting adverts out there, but they're not real jobs. Just to make it look from a market perspective, we're doing okay, because that retains confidence internally as well as externally.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Next up here, what advice would you give a B2C startup looking to build their business during this time?
Don't do it.
Wait till 2024.
There are always great businesses that are built during downturns, and I'm being flippant. What advice would I give?
From my side, I think it depends on the stage you're at, really. Like if you're already sort of well underway, you look for opportunities to pivot potentially. I think if you're just starting out, you're an idea, I don't think there's any harm. Like you don't have to do it full time. You can try and build the idea, test it, get as far as you can without seriously committing, and it gives you a bit of a model of this is what happens in the downturn. So you're building the worst case.
That's a great point.
But if you're further down the line, you invested. I don't know. That's a tough one.
I would probably give the same advice that I give anyone at any stage, which is like focus on what you can control, and specifically like double down on your product, because when the market's going like a bit crazy and marketing costs are going up or businesses are stopping to spend, really the best thing you can do in that point is to make sure you're building an amazing product experience and you're giving value to your customers. So I mean, that's what we're doing. It's like our entire strategy is built around delivering amazing product, because it's what we can control, and ultimately that's how a long and sustainable business is built, is through amazing product. And it always cut through. If you can survive through the ups and downs of the economic climate, that other company that raised 100 million from Sequoia, who grew really fast because they spent loads of money on marketing, well, they'll die in a few years because they didn't focus on product. So I always come back to product.
Yeah, at the end of the day, no one truly buys marketing, right? They buy a product. Like your customers buy your product, and they might fall for the marketing, but at the end of the day, if the product doesn't deliver, you're not going to retain those people, and then you have to go again, right? And that's a cost.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree with everything that's been said. I think if you're a Series A or Series B startup who's realizing revenue and has multiple revenue streams, it's time to be less altruistic in what your product roadmap looks like, and ensuring that all investments in new product development have a sturdy business case and are directed towards where you're going to be making your money, rather than a nice to have feature for a consumer. Is this feature directly delivering into the bottom line? And the way that you do that is with a rigorous business case put forward by the product or the strategy lead looking into that. And I think when you're looking at the earlier stages, if you're looking at seed or angel round, it's really who you are as a person. What experience do you have in here? Second, third round founders rather than first time founders are definitely who's going to get priority at the moment. And then, of course, you've got your TAM and your possibilities and your experience and the exec team launching it, which are going to contribute to the value there. But once you're executing, again, one thing that people fall into is looking at multiple opportunities and not really laser focused on what their raison d'etre is as a company. And that's when having a clear purpose and goals when you're launching the startup really comes into it. So staying the course, keeping laser focus, and making sure that you're making data statistically driven decisions on how to get to that revenue would be what I would say.
Great points. Thank you, James.
Can I add a build to that? Because I do really agree, James. It's like now's not the time to mess around in your product with nice to haves. The only thing I'd build on is there's a really interesting thing I think about, which is as founders, you're under a lot of pressure to kind of stand by your vision. And I actually think it's a bit of BS, because I actually think standing by your vision a lot of the time is like arrogance masked as bravery, or bravery masked as arrogance, whichever way around it makes sense. Put it this way, like, you can have like the clearest vision in the world that you're going to go and change this problem, and then you go and speak to a whole bunch of customers and you're like, oh, actually this thing doesn't make sense, but you've kind of all your investors are like backing you, and then you end up building a company in a corner, and you end up messing it up, and it doesn't make sense because you were so like attached to this vision.
Right.
And so I'm always, and founders kind of get idolized for their vision in a bit, and I think it's actually ultimately damaging. So something I often would say to like newer founders is like, don't hold on, be prepared to like totally like pivot into an entirely different industry if you need to. Like, don't be so beholden to your vision that you end up like building yourself into a corner. It's like this kind of same kind of idea as be prepared to pivot, but in a slightly more extreme way.
Well, I think that's great advice for any founder. And when you layer on, navigating such a large change, such a large potential downturn, it's like Kevin shared, it's a skill set, right? Being able to assess what's going on and make smart decisions forward.
And ask questions like, Chris, as you said, like, you're not resourced to be on that pulse of time, but your investors are saying to you guys, you need to be prepared. This is coming down the pipeline. And if you're a founder without that investor network that's able to do that, go and ask people, speak to other founders all the time. What are you doing? Like, sharing that knowledge, sharing of what is happening in the market, what people are seeing is critical. Because obviously different businesses at different stages, they can hit at different times.
Great advice. A few of you have mentioned, making changes, making pivots in how you're setting out to reach your goals, grow your team, or take a break on growing your team, considering your product and focusing on the most important things right now. How did you identify the right moment to make pivots or make changes in sort of the plan?
To me, it's whatever the customer's telling you. That's when I generally know that it's the right time to pivot.
Yeah.
I think James mentioned something about, being strategic and using the data. And I think having, like, keeping an eye on your data, knowing your numbers, exactly, like understanding how different levers affect your business, and having a clear understanding of that. And if you don't have that, then work really hard to get that really quickly.
Right.
Understanding all of those, how the different levers affect your business in which ways, can help you with that timing, but also being able to understand the data that you get from those levers being pulled and pushed.
Yeah, and I think from an operating perspective, what I've been through a few times is, the word here is how. How do you identify it? What are the communication channels because ultimately the people talking to the customers, if you're enterprise or B2B, is sales. How is that being communicated through to the decision-making center, which is generally the exec? And I'll tell you one thing, I've met very few sales guys who can salespeople, should I say, who can actually communicate that and bring that into a statistical report, which the exec will need to make a decision. So it's how does sales interoperate with product or strategy for that to be properly articulated to inform the decision that will need to be made higher up. And it's that cross-functional aspect of startup, which really comes down to the culture and your ability to communicate as a group, which will help on how you can identify if you need to pivot and which direction to pivot to.
Great points. So having those different teams, those different point of views that have probably different pulses on the market and your audience, being able to come together and synthesize all those trends to equip your execs with the info they need to make smart decisions. Great. We have the next few minutes here left for Q&A. If any of our attendees do have a question for our panelists, please submit those in the chat. We have had a few submitted through the registration process, so I'll kick us off with those. We had an attendee ask, what resources help you stay up to date on technology trends? Are there any locations or locations I should follow or communities I should join? So what's helping you all stay up to date on trends?
So I'm like a huge Reddit fan, and it's a whole bunch of different subreddits if you want to stay up to date on various technology trends. There's quite a few newsletters, like Scott Galloway's newsletter. It's extremely good for. There's some Substacks, but I don't have that many Substacks that I subscribe to. The final thing, I find some of the London founder networks like very, very helpful. There's less for like info, but there's ICE and there's founders as well. Founders without the E. It's not really for technology trends, but they're very good for keeping a finger on the pulse of like how are VCs and founders feeling at the moment.
Right. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think building on that, I'm very old-fashioned in that I just like to get out there and sink beers and chat to people. I think that the London fintech community is very tight and very friendly. And being over here for 3 years, I was born into this. It's incredible. These people progress from colleagues or friends at other companies you're working with to proper friends. And what that turns into is an incredible network where you're on the pulse of everything that's happening. It's incredible. And yes, it takes a toll on the liver, some cases, but it's a labor of love. And it's genuinely where you stay on top of everything. You know what's coming up, who did what, inside information in a very, fair manner. So not in the illegal sense, but you're there because you're communicating in a face-to-face basis and you're sharing this knowledge. It's the wisdom of the crowd effect, which is really, really powerful.
From my side, I guess it's a bit of a hybrid of both those. Reading a lot. I'm a big fan of Reddit too. There's tons of newsletters, and obviously I have that diversity focus. So I love to hear what's happening, like in women in tech, or there's color in tech. So they talk about it. Obviously got like the publications like Sifted. It's a little bit old, but they do have like good reports sometimes. Bowhurst does reports occasionally. It's just trying to find, I guess, various different sort of sources of information, and I check in. Tends to be if like the headline, honestly, it grabbed my attention, but there's some that I just read religiously. Then there's the sort of talking to people, like getting on a phone and just like during those conversations, what are you seeing? What do you think about this? And particularly when I see pitches and decks that come to me and I don't have the deep knowledge of the tech that they're talking about, I try and reach out to somebody in my network, say, what do you think? Like, is this a thing? Is this a problem? Do you want to see it? And sort of go from there to try and understand. So it's a lot of self-education as well.
That's great. Very helpful. Thank you. Our next question, and Chris, you touched on this a little bit. We had a registrant ask, how has the crisis impacted your team and their morale? How are you supporting them through this time of uncertainty?
How's it affected our team morale? Surprisingly, well, sometimes as CEO, I don't know how real the smiles that I get in the hallway are, but people seem in relatively good spirits, I think. Like, we've been through, some challenging times over the last 6 months. What are we doing to support them through it? Nothing new. I'd say our culture in general is very open, vulnerable, and transparent. So we do a lot of I do a lot of open hours where people can grab me at any point. We have a very strong check-in culture with our team. Engagement surveys, nothing out of the ordinary.
Can I make a recommendation there?
Sure.
Do the engagement surveys, but then do something like, firstly, let me give you a caveat. My cousin owns the company, but I'm sure there are others that do this. But happiness survey survey and linking the two to see what differences you get between the two. And they are quite different.
What kind of question would you ask in the happiness survey?
Their thing is based around neuroscience, so there is a lot of science around happiness and how happiness leads to engagement, whereas most engagement companies if you've got a really engaged workforce, you must have a happy workforce. It's not quite the same, because happiness is not a straight line. It ebbs and flows like that. So you could have a very engaged employee, but they're going through something, and this sort of crisis, this sort of pressure of, you know what, my wife's just lost her job, or my husband's just lost their job, so I'm the sole breadwinner now, so I've got to really deliver. So they're really engaged, but quite nervous, quite worried, quite unhappy. And that can have then long-term effects on productivity, because actually, whilst the engagement seems there, the productivity is not reflective. So it's asking questions which really speak to how they feel, as opposed to, do you think, or are you supported by your boss? Yes. Are you happy? On a scale of 1 to 10, it might get a very different answer, right?
Sure.
Yeah, I think it comes a lot down to company culture and the environment that particularly the younger parts of the workforce are experiencing. As a junior joining a startup, you're born into this culture, which is fast-paced, working exceptionally hard. There's no hiding away from the fact that working in a startup isn't a 9-to-5 job. And to get the results that you need and the engagement and fulfillment that you need, striving towards a goal, a purpose beyond money together, is you need to build pride and respect in the workplace. And that's feedback that we've had from some of the stronger performers in all of the companies I've worked in, is it's a strong sense of company pride and the purpose of what you're working towards. And then on the flip side here, specifically around how people are reacting to the current environment, it's really just reaffirmation on their value to the company, and where you are able to ensure that you're communicating with them that they are safe and we are investing in them. And it's not something that they should be concerned about if they are worried about their job, as an example. So I think that clear articulation of company value, as well as the culture that you're building there and instilling that sense of pride, will get you the results that you need as a business leader, as well as the comfort that they need as an employer in the current environment. Employee, should I say.
Thank you, James. I agree. I think that that's wonderful to have that transparency and trust across all different levels and all different teams. Kevin, anything you would add about checking in on how your team is feeling and making sure, or any mechanisms to improve morale if folks aren't feeling good?
I think being transparent, like obviously you can't paint a picture of doom and gloom, right? Like everybody knows it's doom and gloom. So you do have to, like, there's a level of, let's be realistic about what's happening here, but also that there has to be a deep level of, we will get through this and we'll get through it together. We do have to make some hard choices as well, but you know, we believe we can get through to 2024. We can do that. We'll have to work to get a roadmap, and that roadmap might pivot, like that road might change. So it's like being able to have those conversations, that takes trust and openness. That comes from the leadership ultimately, and getting the buy-in of people, but also I think it's great having those open hours so people can come and talk, understand where they fit in. They're probably nervous. They might, you know, everybody feels it, and there's that sense of pressure, which I think from a leadership perspective is trying to ease that pressure of them so that they can perform to their best, and giving that opportunity to be able to do that. But that, if you haven't got that already, it's going to take time. If you've got that, use that. This is now is the time to use that trust and all of that good credit you've built up to genuinely show that we're there for you employees. Like what we're like, you know, from a Diversity X perspective, we're small, but we do have like a weekly call with the founders in the community. We call it a week in review, and we sort of talk about the news topic of the week, 30 minutes, but it ends up, you can ask any questions like, what are you talking, like, what's your issues? We do celebrate. We've always done celebrations at the end of every week. I call it celebrations. It's like the wins, the losses, and the obstacles not overcome. And we're candid. Like, you know, we've got people saying that, I think I'm going to have to take another job because I'm just not getting the funding and the business is slow. It's not going as quickly as I thought it was going to do. What should I do? Am I going to look really bad? And, you know, so people are there to help. So, you know, supporting each other as well, I think is encourage that. You know, not everybody needs to go to a manager. They should be able to talk to their colleagues as well, and building that camaraderie, which I think high performing teams have.
Thank you for sharing. We did have, I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. We did have a question about hiring. And we talked a little bit about it before, but I'm curious if anyone has something to add. They've shared, it's been challenging to navigate hiring or potentially pausing hiring with the uncertainty. How did your teams work through that decision? Was it just a financial decision? I thought one of the interesting things you shared, Kevin, was, you know, it doesn't have to be hire or don't hire. It could also be revisiting people's current roles. So just curious what you all think about, you know, making that decision and revisiting what options you have if not hiring is the path you're going down.
The way that we worked through that, it's different for every team. The way that we work through it is, let's come up with a strategy. Let's come up with where we need to get to over the next 18 months. Okay, we have that strategy. What resources do we need to achieve that strategy? And that resource can be like investment in marketing, or it could be hiring people, or it could be increasing the salaries of your current team. Everything's on the table, and then we just debate that as a leadership team, try and work out the best we have this cash to get to this thing, how are we going to spend it? And then that kind of answered for us if we needed to hire or not. And these things are always trade-offs, and there's no like clear and obvious decision.
Yeah.
But always like starting with the strategy, and then what resources do you need to accomplish that strategy is I don't know, I just find it a simple way of thinking about it. Yeah.
What I've found fascinating from being an outsider, maybe advising, is in those sort of discussions sometimes, like, and I agree with you, Chris, like understanding that strategy and letting that drive the decision making. But then it's like you've got two competing functions, both have significant input or important inputs. Like, we need a resource, who hires? And it's like, understanding like you're all part of the same, it's one pocket to the other pocket. I always look at it as, so what's the overall outcome? Where are you going to get the most impact with that hire? Like, you both to deliver will need a resource. How can you do that? And it might be, is it an option to look at part-time, or one hires here more junior, one gets the one that they want, type of thing. So, but good management teams need to be able to talk through those decisions.
They do, and those conflicts do come up. In my experience, if that conflict does come up, it's because there's some bit of data missing about the expected impact of that role. Because if you have the data, then it should be clear that, okay, no, this is the obvious person to hire, and we shouldn't hire in that thing. So if ever that comes up, I try and encourage us to be like, okay, what's the missing bit of information that we don't have here that is meaning that we're thinking that there's like a trade-off here rather than an obvious decision. But I also like what you said about creative ways of, sometimes it's not as obvious as like hire this person versus this person. There are always creative things you can do.
That's great. Thank you. And one more question for us today, circling back on something you shared, James, that was working really well, was being able to get input from different teams, synthesize the trends they're seeing, and equip execs with that information to make decisions. So I think you mentioned sales, product, maybe customer success. Tactically, how do you encourage that cross-team collaboration? What is that synthesis process like?
It's funny because it's second nature to me. I joined startup three years ago and got put into a cross-functional squad basically a month into the game. So it's all I know in startup. And joining some startups, it's not actually common practice for sales to talk to product. And I think it comes down to understanding of each other's roles and comfortability in involving other people in the process of building a new product or evaluating an opportunity or rebuilding a solution to better suit a larger enterprise customer. And it all comes down to, for me, having a sales-oriented product person or a product-oriented salesperson, because then they can talk on the same level. It's sort of like, product is from Mars and sales is from Venus in some organizations, when really you need to both be on the same page. Some of the most incredible times I've had in startup have been like building the SME broker lending proposition at Fluidly, or the SME categorization at Credit Kudos. And that was all done cross-functionally. My skill set is talking shit, basically. And product skill set is being smart and figuring out what to build from that. And those two things combined equal a great environment to be able to build product or make decisions on whether to build product.
I like that, because I think it's it's good to see each other's point of views and each other's challenges, so they can see, I'm going out there and I'm trying to sell this thing, and these are the conversations I'm having. Well, I'm here with the customers, and this is the experience I'm seeing, and bringing that together is the best way to find the best final solution.
Yeah. And sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it's like,
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
I'm like, guys, we can sell this, let's make some money. And then product's like, where's the statistical proof that you can do that? And there's this thing, but what happens as you push harder is you find a direction. And that way you're unified and you've come to that decision together. And that means that you're avoiding situations where it's a he said, she said, we made the decision separately. You've made the decision together because you're using every bit of information to get there.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, well, we again, thank you very much to all our panelists for being here today. I thought the conversation was great, and I really am hopeful that the things we've discussed today will help others navigate the crisis. And as a follow-up, we'll be sharing all the resources ThoughtBot has to support founders and their teams in navigating these changes, as well as information to reach out to our panelists and their social media so you can see what their companies are up to and work to build your own community. But thank you all very much for attending, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, team.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.